We go.
Let's do it.
Cool. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Game Factory podcast. Today we're talking about marketing. So I'm joined once again with Mike Bithell and Andrew Smith. And yeah, I guess we might as well start the marketing conversation talking about what the purpose of marketing is, and as specifically as possible.
Cool.
Well, all right. I think the purpose of marketing is to make people aware of your game, right? On a very, very simple level. It's very different to PR because that's not making people aware of your game. Marketing is anything from like a branded piece of content. So what we used to call an advert, but which now can sort of take all kinds of forms, down to do you know what? Actually, I think I've talked myself into a corner there. I think almost anything that you do that is branded with your game is marketing, right? So even if it's like a forum post and you've got like a nice little logo in your signature or something like that, even something as incidental as that, still counts. So yeah.
I guess you mentioned PR versus marketing. Like, how would you generally define PR then?
So PR is... No, go on, Mike. Yeah.
No, he asked you. Go for it. Sorry. PR is mainly about interrupting people during podcasts and having your opinion. Carry on, Smithy, please.
Well, I think PR's it's more to do with sort of perceive you. It's to do with like, it's less about a single brand, I think, and it's more about the sort of the conversation that you have. There are going to be so many annoying words in this podcast. And like the tone of it and the quality of it and the focus of it, that's PR. And that sort of ranges from, how you act on Twitter, I suppose, just generally, all the way up to like trying to get like, I don't know, meetings with the right press and stuff like that. Yeah. So like the two certainly have a lot of overlap, but it's more about like, it's like the difference between, strategy and tactics or whatever. Like there's a lot of broadly similar stuff, but it's all about the execution and sort of which way you point it.
I think as well, like, I think it's, just to build on what you said, it kind of is everything in terms of your public kind of, anything you do in public is either marketing or PR if you're a dev.
Yeah.
And we've seen lots of examples over the years of people who've forgotten that they're in public and have maybe not had success as a result of like, saying something stupid or whatever. It's certainly the lesson I had to learn was that, how I present online is incredibly important and that I need to be incredibly mindful of that audience at all times. And I think it's something that even when you're, you have 2 Twitter followers, you should be thinking about because, folks go back through your Twitter and find stuff and being well behaved and being a professional. It's a shame that you have to be, but, there's press out there, there's idiots on the internet. It's just, you've just got to be incredibly aware that you are on display.
Yeah, I mean, one interesting, I guess, counterpoint of a lot of people I talk to think of marketing as, I don't know, like more explaining what your game is, which I think is part of it, or, trying to specifically sell your game to people that wouldn't really want it per se. But I think
tricking people into giving you money.
Tricking people, yeah, exactly.
Nice.
But I think awareness is definitely the right way to think about it, where, you sort of choose your market and, there's so many people in the world that would enjoy it, and marketing is just trying to reach as many of them as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy way of looking at it because we're the 3 of us, we're indie devs. We're not creating that kind of mega game that like 50% of the world population are going to pick up.
Yeah.
So therefore, I massively believe in going after that niche. Sitting down and going, right, there are like maybe about 30,000 people in the world who want this specific game. I'm going to make it and then I'm going to get it to them.
Yeah.
And it's just more honest, right? Like I don't want anyone to buy a game of mine and like feel bad about it. Like I don't want to trick people. I want people to be disappointed. I'm not going to talk about my games as if they're things that they aren't because, it's just, who needs that? Who needs that stress?
Yeah, I feel like there was it might be a US to UK thing, because I know like in the UK when you have a big advert for a game, you have to say what's gameplay footage and what's not. And I feel like there definitely was at least, somewhat of an era, at least in AAA, where it was, you show one thing and say buy this thing, pay all your money up front, and then when you put the disc in, you're going to experience something totally different. I think there was an era of that, but I think regulations have sort of helped us out, but I think people are just too savvy for that nowadays.
Well, the internet exists, right? Like, if a game comes out, and again, we've seen this a few times in the last couple of years, if a game comes out and like really buggy or doesn't work or something's wrong with it, then that word spreads like terrifyingly quickly. But what's nice is we can fix those things really quickly. We had a massive design problem in Volume, which is available in a sale currently on the Humble store. There you go, some marketing for this to the 10 people watching. But we had this problem where we had a massive kind of design mistake, essentially something that I'd let through and was in the game, and we saw chatter. Critics, some of them were bothered by it, some of them weren't. But we were just seeing this thing, and it's like, okay, we'll fix that. And it took us like 3 days, and we could fix that. That's the flip side of it. That we also have the opportunity, thanks to the internet, to solve problems. But the marketing, like, I guess, damage, or definitely the kind of the problem that is, that existed. That was a frustration for us.
Yeah. I mean, I think it might be like my programming background, but something I used to hear all the time, and I hear it less and less now, is I just want to make the game, I don't want to market it. And I think that's not really an option at all anymore. Like, I don't.
You can find someone to market it for you.
Well, so someone has to do the marketing for a game, but I feel like
someone's going to be doing some marketing.
That sort of dream of your game is so good that the word of mouth just magically happens. I don't think I can think of a single case where that's really.
I can think of a couple, but I wouldn't want to insult the people involved by saying this game was really badly marketed. I think there are geniuses. I think if you genuinely create a game that is like 95 Metacritic, if you're that good, or your game is that good, then I still think that's possible. There's certainly been games that have come out in the last few years where there was no buzz or noise about them. But for those of us who make 8 out of 10 games, you're gonna have to get out there and you're gonna have to push your game. You're gonna have to get people looking, because it's tough. To an extent it should be. Where people are paying us to entertain them, they should be discerning.
Yeah, I was trying to think of. I mean, now that it's one of those things of, you say like I can't think of a single one, but I can think of a few, and I guess
but they're really rare, right? And they're amazing. Like, there's no mediocre games that have done really well with no marketing.
Yeah, and I guess we'll get onto it later, but I feel like a lot of those games sort of have an advocate that is like, well, they didn't organize this marketing, but someone is marketing it for them.
Fan, right?
Exactly. This fan is, the Total Biscuit has decided that this is his favorite game ever, and
the light of the YouTuber is upon thee.
I guess what.
I was going to say, there's probably at least for every one of those that we can think of that had no marketing plan but was a success, there's probably 20 we've never heard of.
I would guess there's hundreds for each one, right?
But like still just high quality games with no marketing plan that just didn't find the route,
And also, what's really weird is that I'm hearing from a lot of people that like the kind of the YouTuber advocate kind of thing, the idea that one YouTuber can make a game sell. I'm not hearing so many stories about that anymore. Like, it doesn't seem that that's still the case. Like, it definitely was. Like, when Thomas came out, Total Biscuit uses the example. Like, him and Nerdcubed liking Thomas Was Alone had a very visible effect. I wouldn't say necessarily that it made the game, but they certainly, you can see that bump, and you can then see that bump sustaining. So, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I've heard from a few people who've had kind of games that were massively praised by one of, not those two examples in particular, but by a big YouTuber, and then just not seen that kind of happen, which is weird. It felt like there was a couple of years there where we'd worked out this magic formula, and that's not the case anymore. But there'll be a new one along, there'll be something coming along.
Yeah, and I think
it's a maturation almost. Sorry, go on me.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, like, in the classic advertising industry, they usually say you need to hear about something 6 to 8 times before you act on it. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's a lot of stuff where, 1 or 2 people are advocates, but if it's not building up and, timing itself well enough, a lot of people aren't actually pushed to the purchase. Sorry, what were you going to say, Andrew?
I was just going to say as well, like, it's a maturation of, so back then, that was like the peak of like it was when both releasing indie games on Steam was exciting, as in it was something you could do and was newsworthy in and of itself, but also the same with almost YouTubers becoming a thing. Like that was kind of the same time that several of them were like, "Oh, hey, I'm buying a house now," and that was
there
like,
was that narrative in the air, right? It was the thing that
and
week,
so yeah, like essentially back then that was like the perfect storm, because the two things meant that it all worked out nicely. But now you might even have a bigger audience from different YouTubers or whatever, but there are also so many more games every day, and it's like they're struggling to cover them all. People are just my buying habits have changed, because it's just like I just don't have time to even keep up with what's coming out. So yeah, like it's going to be an interesting shift, because for them as content creators, it's great. Like they're just like, oh hey, I've got all these games I can play. I just need to sift through them and find one that resonates with my audience. But it's for us lot making this.
Well, yeah, I feel like it's just as competitive for them, really. I mean, while they're being successful, there's more and more YouTubers coming up.
There's a great deal of skill involved, right? In being a good YouTuber, like it's a massively challenging. Having tried to do some streaming myself, like I realize there's a lot of talent there.
Yeah, so let's sort of dig into sort of the mechanics of actually implementing a marketing campaign. I mean, one question that I'm wondering myself right now is like, when do you start marketing your game?
I've had lots of answers to this over the years. My current answer is the second you have something to show which you're not going to be embarrassed by if it is used forever. Because I look back at Volume, and Volume I started working on that in February 2013, and we announced in August of that year. And put out some screenshots, put out their first trailer, and I look at those screenshots and I'm just so embarrassed because they look amateur hour, like really awful. They're not terrible, but like I hate them. And like I saw reviews hit for the game that had those screenshots illustrating them, and I'm just like, this isn't acceptable. So I'm tending towards later, but a lot of devs like really open development. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I know for me, like the ego wants like it not to be shown till it's ready to be shown. But I think there's definitely a case for developing publicly.
Yeah, I guess you said it was announced August 2013, so you ran a marketing campaign for about 2 years. Is that right?
Run a marketing campaign might be overstating professionalism, but
I mean, you were marketing the game.
It was out there. It was known that I was making this game and that it was coming. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like that game grew in scope while it was in production. Like it was meant to come out like the following year. It was not planned that it would be 2 years kind of in development publicly, but I just kind of, as Thomas had success, I started adding things and going, hey, I can afford to get this stuff added, and started playing with different ideas and stuff, and just elongate, because I had no one that was waiting for it, like on a financial level, so I could just kind of carry on. And the game's better for it, so I'm not going to knock those choices, but like, I certainly, if I was planning, like, if I knew the release date then, probably would have held off a fair bit more than I did.
I guess, if magically we knew, this game's going to be released, let's say December 2015, like when do you know when you would stop marketing? Are there certain things you'd consider to figure out whether you start marketing it or not? Or
it depends, right, on the game. Like I loved Fallout's approach this year, like because they knew that they just needed to make the noise at the right moment and that the audience would show up, and it worked. And it's I don't know. What do you think, Smithy?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. It's like a hard decision to make. I think it's maybe down to the kind of game and the kind of developer, and maybe those two things are different. Like you say, sort of with Tango, we went on early access. We were really public really early. We weren't necessarily really chuffed with what we were showing, but we thought from how people were responding at shows that it was early enough to go with that. We did open development to a degree, but I think we could have done a lot better on it, and that would have been a sensible thing to do. I think if you're going to go early, I think you just got to sustain it. I don't think anyone's ever going to get bored as long as you're talking about new things, and there's always new things to talk about during the development of a game. So if that's what you want to do, I think you've got to go really, really hard with it. But then, conversely, I kind of something I miss from back in the day, and I don't know whether it's something that's important now or whether anyone else would appreciate it. But it's that sense of not actually knowing what a game is until like, you know, a couple of weeks before it's out, or in fact until you've played it. I know that the latter is basically impossible these days if you look for the information it's out there, but just the idea of a game being a bit of a mystery, you know. One of the classic ones was Metal Gear Solid 2, and that's, you know, the whole marketing campaign was about Snake being back.
It wasn't so much mystery as a bald-faced lie.
But it's fantastic, you know, like, and it's still a talking point, you know. I think it's really cool, and yeah, there's like I miss that because that's what I grew up with, you know, like getting a game magazine and going, oh, what is this? And imagining what it might be. There's just like a few screenshots and no information or whatever. And now there's so few games that do that. But that's a risk, you know. You've got to be really confident that what you're making is interesting because, you might. There's a million and one things that you can't predict that might basically either steal your thunder or just, you know, cloud the skies to really.
Yeah, I mean, there's two great examples of what you're talking about. One is well, I'm not going to name the games. They're two games of people I've been talking to recently, and in one case, it was a game where they announced it and everyone was very excited, and then because it took them like several years to come through, by the time it finally kind of got where it got to market, people had got bored of it. Like the idea, they'd already enjoyed the idea, they'd already enjoyed the artwork and the whatever, and then they didn't want to give money in order to experience something that they kind of felt had already been out. You know what I mean? Like they already had that knowledge. So I've seen that happen recently. And another one is something that's not coming out because it was a game that was in production that was very, very similar to an indie game that has been announced recently, and they've just looked at that scenario and gone, we're not going to beat those people. Our game's, you know, not as good or not as exciting or different as that game, and they've just gone, we can't really do that. So it's, and I mean that's, you know, that's sad as well. But there's certainly, it used to be the case. I remember when we were like back in like 2013, it used to be the case where you would say like indies don't compete with each other. Like there's no competition. There's room for all of us. And this was perhaps never true, but certainly it was felt that like there was enough. There weren't enough of us, and there was money to be made. Yeah. Whereas now, like it genuinely is competitive. Like there are, you know, if two indie games come out on the same day, they will have an impact on each other. You know, we had it with Volume that I had like 2 or 3 guys say to me like, we've moved our release date to avoid you, and that's the point where you're like, this is actually a mega thing. This is a deal now. This is something that we are. So arguably marketing becomes even more important because at some point, like, you know, if mine and Smithy's games are coming out the same month, then it's sort of my job to make my game more exciting and cool than his game in terms of people's perception. That requires marketing. Yeah. So I feel like this is only going to become more and more of a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you mentioned there was that, you know, they took so long to develop the game that people lost interest. Like, what is the kind of cadence that you've sort of seen when people, like, how often do you need to release something for it to stay relevant in people's minds?
Well, I'm currently banking on 2 to 3 years between each game. Like,
but like, I mean, once you've announced the game, you know, trying to keep it fresh, basically.
I don't think you want more than a year as an indie game. I think more than a year is overkill.
Yeah, I mean, but even, you know, like, I guess when you release a new trailer, like, it feels like, you know, maybe you want to do a new trailer at least every 6 months, maybe even 3 months. Like, it seems like you need to have something going on all the time.
Well, it's so Rami, the way he describes it, I've heard him talking to up and coming devs, and he always tries to he wants one story about Vlambeer in the press. I think it's every month or every week. I think it's every week he tries to get something, and obviously it doesn't always work, like, you know, but he'll always try and get a newsworthy thing happening every week to every couple of weeks, just to keep the name in people's minds, and it works. You know, Vlambeer, probably more than any other studio name in indie, like individuals are probably more known than Vlambeer, but like in terms of company names, Vlambeer, like it's an indie company people have heard of, and that no doubt has a massive effect on his game's successes. So I think, being present and visible, and, you know, when a journalist emails you asking you for a comment on whatever, like, as long as you feel you can got off a good comment, then you should take that opportunity. You know, you should always be annoyingly present. Which is something I've done a very good job of over the last few years of being irritatingly visible. But it works, and it creates this illusion that you're more important than you actually are. And it's certainly something I learned from you, Smithy. Actually, like I remember when I first kind of started, I looked at you as someone who was always doing, like, you were always commenting, like, you know, you'd be in like there'd be a Guardian article about video games from the 70s, and there'd just be a little box out of Smithy going, yeah, like, I played some games from the 70s once, they were great. I was just like, that's brilliant. So it doesn't always have to be your game, I guess, is the other aspect of it. Like, if your studio has an interesting thing, and just pacing, like you say, pacing them out. If you have two really cool things that you feel you're ready to talk about, don't talk about them both in the same interview. Hold one off and you know, get to it later.
Yeah, I think, like, if you think about, we were talking about mailing lists, I think, a while back, and you know, you sort of think maybe an email every sort of month, and that's it's an odd one because that's you talking to people who have opted in and want to hear, and you don't want to. You do like one thing a month, and it's usually like a collation of a bunch of interesting things, and you don't want to like bore them or whatever. But then, conversely, so you maybe think, oh, maybe just do like a thing a month, but actually, like you should try and get something to stick every month, and like with Vanvid trying it every week, it doesn't happen every week, so ultimately it works out to about every month.
And that's really true. That's really true in marketing. Is not every plan works. Like, you know, not every video or trailer you make is going to be a hit. You know, you try a lot, and this is true in so many areas, but you try a lot so that when it works, you look clever. You know, I've put out trailers that no one watched. I've put out, you know, like, I've tweeted about something that I'm like, this is totally going to be a story, and then nothing happens. And then I've said something completely innocuous, and that's become a story. And so you put out lots of things and stuff, you know, hopefully every now and again something sticks, and that helps to build your reputation.
Yeah, I think that one of the great things about that is it's sort of like this self-selecting thing of like, if you do something and it gets picked up on, then it's like, oh great, everyone saw the thing that got picked up on. But if it doesn't get picked up on, then no one even notices. It's not like a huge embarrassment of like, oh, you've tried this thing and it didn't work out. It's like, well, you know, that you did this thing and nobody noticed, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who mocks you for trying something and it not working is probably someone who doesn't try a lot of things. Like, you know, it's cool.
Yeah, I wanted to have a really quick discussion. It's interesting to hear both of you talk about how marketing used to be in the past and how nowadays you do it. Like, it feels like the attention span is so hard to compete for nowadays that you just have to do shorter campaigns and more intense campaigns. Would you guys agree with that?
Seems to be the way. Until it isn't. That's always the thing with any marketing advice, like, right? Like, we're not... You know, I guess when you look at like the mega hits this year, like the things that have done like in the indie space, so something like, say, Her Story, like that was very word of mouthy. Like, it didn't take off immediately, I don't think. I think that was something that built because it's an amazing game, and I think it just slowly kind of ebbed and flowed. That was not a game that anyone had heard of before. I remember going to an event and just sitting in a bar with Sam Barlow like a couple of months before Her Story came out, and like us chatting, and I'd never heard of it, and he was describing it like, I'm making this video game where like there's an interview with a witness to a crime, and I'm like, sounds really great, mate. Yeah, I'm sure that's gonna be well, like, so yeah, it's tricky. It's something that I think. Oh, I'm being told to be louder. Sorry, you were doing that subtly, weren't you? So I didn't. Sorry, I've ruined the magic of this recording. So I think that, like, with that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of those games that I think is just so good.
Yeah.
That
it's so different.
Yeah,
right?
It just stood out. It was innovative. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess let's dive into like some specific marketing things. I guess you already mentioned the social media stuff. I think one of my proudest tweets was when Mike was announcing Volume. My tweet was 2009 Andrew Smith would be so proud of you. But yeah, I think both of you, you know, had a phase of being extremely active on Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like both of you have stepped back a little bit. Is there any particular reason for that? Like, is it that it wasn't working, or was it just taking too much time and too much energy?
Smithy, do you want to go first?
I think for me, it was a combination of things. Part of it was initially I was like, when Twitter was like becoming a thing and was interesting for like game devs and journalists and stuff. That was, I think, around that time that me and Mike sort of flourished on there. I didn't have much of a social life, being completely blunt. I was working from the shed, so it was kind of my office hubbub. It was also a lot of my banter and chit chat, and so that was just led to me being a lot more. I was just on it all the time. I didn't have much else to do, to be honest. And then also, yeah, like just seeing that it's good to have, but it is no longer as effective as it used to be. It's no longer as, I don't know if relevant's the right word, but it just seems like a lot of people have become jaded with it. I think I'm not sure like what the numbers are for growth on Twitter, like in terms of like global use, but it feels like it's very much like slowed down. Everyone who wants to be on it is on it, knows how to use it, is following the people they want to, and that's sort of, that just has left it there. It's always going to be a channel, but it's not like the preeminent one for me anymore.
I to be honest, similar kind of like, when it first happened, I loved it and, got very excited by new shiny things as is the usual nerdy response to stuff. I wouldn't say I've fallen out with it, but it's certainly, I'm acutely aware of the negativity it brings, like especially for me. I've had, I go on Twitter and I get a lot of nasty stuff sent to me. Not a lot, like compared to, obviously there's people who get much worse than me, but like it's not all positive. I get mean things written to me, and it hit a point, about a year and a half ago. Obviously there was lots of issues on Twitter then. And just I realised that this was potentially a net negative thing, like in terms of just my like fucking, sorry, my first bleep of the thing. But in terms of like my mental well-being, I was like, this isn't a place that's making me better or more interesting. And as Smithy says, like, I'm not convinced that Twitter has that same kind of energy and way of pushing kind of stuff that it did either. So it's very useful to have. It's very cool. I have. I've made a lot of friends there, and I, use it for a lot of promotional stuff and whatever. It's a great platform, very useful, but it's no longer like the core of how I talk to people. I'm trying to do, things like podcasts, things like, trying to find different ways of talking to people. The other aspect, I think, which I got frustrated with Twitter, is that it is so limited, is that it's so easy to be kind of misrepresent yourself or say something stupid or, not convey something you want to convey. It's much easier to kind of ramble on a Twitch stream or, do a blog post or something. And I just found myself getting frustrated with like, how am I going to express this in 140 characters and I'm not going to get 5 angry messages from people on various sides of different fences, and it became less fun. I think the final aspect, sorry to be really boring and go on for quite a while, I found that whereas before it felt like this kind of social space where me and my friends talked about making video games, and then you'd have a few random people come in and chat, which was lovely, it flipped. It became somewhere where me and my friends were, but we were all being very careful about what we said in public because we knew people were waiting to get angry about different things. And the vast majority of the stuff I was receiving was kind of not interesting or not relevant, and it stopped being a cool place to hang out,
Yeah, I mean, I've never really used Twitter as like as a marketing channel, really. I mean, I talk about the stuff that I'm working on, and I think that has some marketing aspect to it, but for the most part, for me, Twitter has always been all about like finding the right balance of people that it's comfortable, but also there's enough interesting views that I'm sort of pushed on things that I'm like, I'm forced to consider perspectives that I wouldn't consider normally and that kind of thing. And so yeah, I've always struggled to sort of use it as a marketing channel. And even nowadays, like, we've been announcing Foam Sword stuff, and I think you guys are right in that sort of the level of excitement that there used to be over things it just seems to be dissipated a lot. Like the positivity seems to be dissipated a lot more quickly, and the negativity seems to build and build and build. And I think that's the part of it that I do struggle with nowadays. But I still think it's an important channel because you can sort of, I think the great thing about it is that you can reach up, right? Like I think you have better hangouts with your friends on Facebook. But if you want to reach up to, you know, whether reaching up is to press at this point or YouTubers or that kind of thing, it's like it's a good way to start to, you know, build like a very distant relationship with these kind of
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I still use it to find cool stuff to read, and I'm on there far too much, you know. Still, like I tweet a lot. It's certainly somewhere that I'm on constantly, but it's not. Yeah, I'm not as excited about it as I was, I guess.
Yeah.
Moo, what you're saying there, I think, is absolutely right. That it's kind of its main use for me now, I think, is actually like pure tools wise, is it's an accepted sort of non-awkward way for you to reach out and touch. Get in touch. Sorry.
Stop reaching out and touching people.
Stop reaching out. This screen gets in the way all the time. It's really frustrating. Yeah, to get in touch with people that you've never had any conversation with before, or you've never met, whatever. So it might be that a YouTuber or something, they posted a video and you've got your search going, and you're like, oh cool, someone did it, and you can just go, hey, what's up, and whatever, and that's actually really good. Like, I think that helps a lot of the kind of let's say personality types that sort of tend to be involved in video games. You know, a lot of people are quite shy or not used to like pushing their own work and feel really uncomfortable doing what they would do on Twitter in a social circumstance. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of funny going back to what the distinction we were making earlier. It seems like Twitter sort of changed from a marketing platform to a PR platform, basically. Right. It's all about like, you know, trying to build these relationships, you know, with these people, but like much like a pub environment, it's like there's this thing going on around you that you're also kind of aware of. I guess one thing that, you know, we've been experimenting with a bit at Foam Sword is the mailing list idea. And it's sort of under this thesis that I have, that I believe that what's most important is that you can get, you know, as many highly engaged advocate type people involved as possible. And it's just trying to find a way to be able to communicate with those people regularly and to hear from those people regularly. You know, I feel like it's trying to find the people that most like the idea of what you're doing and listen to them as much as you can, so that, you know, to sort of drown out all the other voices. And I think that's been really great on our side. And we, you know, launched our first email, and it's, you know, had massive open rates and, you know, quite a bit of silly like Twitter engagement and that kind of stuff. And I feel like you're never going to reach the same number of people on a mailing list as you are on Twitter, because, you know, it's opt-in. But I do feel like each one of those people just seems to be a lot more engaged and a lot more willing to buy into your thing.
Give me 10 super interested, excited views rather than 100 vague, I'm not that interested views any day of the week. Like that's where we excel as indies. That's where we can actually can work, because, you know, when we can't get the millions and millions and millions of views that, you know, a bigger game can get, but we can, because of our size, actually kind of have the kind of relationship you're talking about with the audience, which is crucial, and that kind of keeps us going.
Yeah, I guess another thing that you mentioned earlier, Mike, is like doing these sort of longer form things, whether it's podcasts or dev diaries or dev streams. I know, Andrew, you were doing a series of dev diaries for a while. How did you find that was?
Yeah, it was good. It was kind of effective in ways I wasn't expecting for me, in that it kind of helped me sort of think about what we were doing in a different way, literally like week to week or whatever. I didn't spend much time, you know, making it a polished production or anything like that. It was just my iPhone and often on a pile of DVDs or something like that. And I think early on it was picked up on a bit more strongly because the time that I was doing it, like I said, when Mike was releasing Thomas Was Alone, and like there was a lot of interest in the indie dev scene on mobile and PC, and that was just an exciting thing to get a glimpse into for people. And it was more about spilt milk rather than the games that we were making. And then it just became kind of a habitual thing, and then we did it with Tango as a more concentrated, right, you know, like let's get the name of the game out there, which seemed to work. Everyone seems to have heard of it, which is good. I'm not sure many people know what it is. That's the I mean, I don't think it suits everyone. You know, I'm fairly comfortable in front of a camera. I know a lot of people freeze up or whatever. I don't mind the sound of my own voice that much. I've gotten over that weird peculiarity that we all have as humans. And it never it never really took too much of my day. I think that was an important part of it, you know. it's like a bite-sized thing. It's 10-15 minutes, and I literally I don't even edit it. I use the YouTube thing to stick a spilt milk ident on the start or whatever. And you know, there were people who watch it religiously and ask questions religiously, and that was really nice. I think it was basically like a video newsletter, I suppose. Yeah. I'm certainly looking to sort of get back into it in the new year. It's been a little while since you can kind of tell, like, all of these things seem like, we know that marketing is really important and it should be part of your daily job, but it's so hard to keep up doing it because it seems secondary when you're like, yes, but this bit doesn't work in the game, or that's not fun. Right?
Well, we're not broadcasters, are we? We're game developers. That's our excitement. That's what we get excited by, and that's what we want to spend our time doing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the worst irony about that situation is that the time that we're busiest is the time we need to spend the most time on marketing. It's just like, you know, as you're ramping up to releasing a game, it's like, well, I don't have enough time to even get this game quality up to where I need it to be, and then I have to do all this marketing stuff on top of it. So I did a series of blog posts for Ringfling about the development of Ringfling and that kind of stuff, and you know, I didn't really look at the view numbers. They seemed okay. But one thing I found really interesting is anytime I was reaching out to press and that kind of stuff, and anytime I did get covered, you could tell that they, you know, were like, okay, we're going to do the story and now we'll do our research. And then they, you know, would dig through some of these and probably skim them and find little interesting bits and pieces to include. And I think, you know, I wonder if some of those articles that were written, if they're like, well, we can't really find enough meat for this thing, so we're not going to write this, and, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, it's one of these things of, you never know, like, if this was the thing that made it or didn't make it, but like, you know, you can definitely tell that they did this thing and this thing probably helped in some way.
It all helps. Like, it all adds up. It all has an effect, even if you don't see it immediately. You know, I've had things where, so an example for me is that, like, a lot of the people who follow me on Twitter because of a live stream I was on YouTube, like, 2 years ago, where I did a Star Wars script read through doing Han Solo with a southern accent. And it's one of those things where, like, I did it because it was funny at the time. It was an hour of my day, and now I'm very conscious that a large-ish number of people who bought volume, for example, will have done so because of that thing I did all that time ago. So it all plugs in, like, even the stuff that's less successful than that, it's all building that noise, that kind of that irritated boredom, you know, of, oh god, it's another bloody article about so and so, and that's because that person is working to maintain visibility.
One thing is another method that, like, I don't know, so on Foam Sword right now we've just got a website and all it has is a mailing list sign up, just because we don't have much out there right now. But I guess, what are some tips that you guys have for website development, or, like, not development side, but, like, what do you put on your website, what's it important for, and that kind of thing?
I think these days, like, there are almost like two sides to a site. Like, people kind of, I think you need to make it a storefront. Like, if you've got a game to sell, it's probably, unless someone's already searching via Steam or whatever, it's probably the first place they're going to hit if you've done your job right, and, you know, the internet's full of links to your game. And so it needs to be like a storefront. It's something that Tango Fiestas isn't, and it's on my list of things to fix amongst a million of them. But it, like, genuinely, you know, it needs to be like screenshots, GIFs, videos, you know, trailer, and big fat buy it now buttons, all really heavy-handed stuff. But then on the flip side, like, there's so much value in finding, as you've said, these incredibly like invested super fans, whatever you want to call them, and that they aren't really served by that. So you need like a kind of behind the scenes bit somehow. You know, usually that is blog or a forum or whatever. But the question that I don't know what the answer is, but, like, you know, the Steam has its forums for your game, like, automatically. So do you use those, or should a bunch of indie devs in London make an indie dev forum? So that
I like the fact that the ones in London should do it.
That's true. They all get funding. We have to work hard. But yeah, like, you know, like with small studios, you know, you kind of think, well, I want to set up like somewhere where people can talk about my games, but there's only going to be like a post a week without, you know, and then make something like a ghost town, and then that turns people off joining up, and rah.
I mean, that's the weird part right now, is if you're making PC games, like, arguably you want as much activity on Steam as you can keep on Steam, just because it helps with the metrics, it keeps people coming in. So, like, there's an argument against, pulling too much of that stuff. But then, like, I also know devs who are like, no, I have my own forum, and they have this little audience, and it might only be like 100 people, but they really care, and that's a massively useful little army to have. So yeah, we do exactly what Smithy's describing. The kind of blog/shop front is how we treat our site, and it works. And we get people coming through, and we send them on their way to a shop to buy our game. We have the widgets and stuff. Like a lot of the stores give you these widgets so people can stay on your site and buy a thing or whatever. But yeah, I'm not convinced that these things are massively important. I think they're worth setting up, but I wouldn't like. It's not something I think you should spend a great deal of time or money on. I think they are, we use Squarespace, there's lots of other things like that. Just something you can get made in a couple of days, and then, someone on the team can maintain and add blog posts to when you need to is fine. I think that's absolutely okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I was thinking about it, is it's sort of this catcher for this kind of latent sort of relatively passive interest. Mm-hmm. So it's like, someone's heard about it, they don't know really what it is, and it's like, they'll go to your website, and it's your job to try and say like, oh, that thing you vaguely heard about is exactly what you actually want. Here's the button to buy it.
I'm just looking now, like if I Google my game, so my game gets top billing, then Wikipedia, then Steam. Like that's how this works.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, and that's basically what you want, and I think. Yeah, I think websites aren't massive sellers per se, because the platforms they have a much higher buying intent when you go to Steam. It's like I either want to play something or I want to buy something. Where I think when you're browsing the web, there's a million other things to do. Let's talk a little bit about trailers and sort of how you, I guess, what is your approach to making a trailer? Is it? I think a lot of people sort of go with. You want to make a trailer that's really, really memorable, and I think sometimes they sort of miss including your game in that memorable thing. But yeah, I guess what are your approaches?
It's only a mistake we made with Volume, actually. Like if you look at like the early trailers for Volume, they were super kind of really cool camera angles and showing moments and slow-mo and drama, and it did lead to this situation where. Like, I remember I was at GDC with it earlier this year, actually. Like, so about 6 months before the game came out, and, sat down with a journalist, and she played for about 10 minutes, and, gave me back my laptop, and I said, like, so, do you like it? Is it okay? And she was like, can I be completely honest with you? I'm like, please do. She's like, it's so much better than I assumed it was from the trailers. And this was and that I believe that outlet then ran with a story of like literally Volume is better than you think it is. And it's like that's a failure on my part in terms of those early trailers. I think the mistake I made was I tried to promote it as if it were a AAA. Like I was like, well, Assassin's Creed can do obtuse trailers. And it's like, yeah, Assassin's Creed do obtuse trailers because they have that budget to do that. You can't. So from that point on, our trailers became much more literal. Here is gameplay, and we experienced much better success with those kind of trailers than we did with all of the clever shenanigans we tried. Just get to the gameplay. Show me what the game is. There are trailers that are very gimmicky, like where they've done like a joke trailer or something, but. While I think those get you like that short-term kind of blog presence, I'm not entirely convinced those then translate to. Oh, have you got a cat joining?
I've got a cat jumping and pulling blankets and stuff. That's fine.
I don't think those trailers necessarily equate to then a successful game. If your objective is to sell a game, which it probably is, then making a video that's too interesting in its own terms and forgets to promote the game, I think is a potential massive big misstep.
Yeah, with Tango, covering some of like the practicalities, I guess, because I just agree with everything Mike said. Basically, we had a publisher, Monstronic, who had like their video guy. With all the will and the best intent in the world, it was always a rush to get a trailer done. It was always like, oh crap, we need this thing and we haven't got it or whatever. But I think if you're trying to do a trailer in a week, you're gonna struggle. That's tended to be what happened with us. And we tended to just capture, as much raw gameplay footage from the shiniest build that we had. I would spend a day writing the script for it, like minute and a half long trailer. Several sort of go-overs, get feedback from everyone involved, and then sort of sign off on it. Because we had a narrator who was a really fun voice actor to work with, and so we kind of went for kind of comedy and tone of the game, as well as just lots of footage in the background. Like the character designs were kind of one of the more fun, sort of colourful sides of the game. It's always hard to tell like how much of an impact the trailers have. Like views is one thing, but then how do you track sales? A lot of it we did. I think we did one for the announcement of our early access launch date. Then we did one like I think 3 or 4 weeks later for the actual launch on early access. We'd planned to do one per new world that we'd add, because it would basically be like a boss and an environment and based on an 80s action movie. But we never actually managed to release anything. We did one that was that discreet, but then the rest of it was just like we just need to like be updating. And we never had like the opportunity to go, and here's the homage to Ghostbusters, that sort of thing. I think we managed it with Killian Air, but that was it. Running Man. Like we had a plan and we didn't really stick to it. And that was more driven by like the development style, I guess. Which is one of the risks when you're doing open development or whatever. You kind of. You just don't have the time to kind of do everything, then sit there and think, is this actually what we wanted to achieve? You just sort of do it as it's required, and then it's, a week later it's done and it's out and you're moving on to the next thing and it's all out of date. And it's really, really opposition. I guess if you put out too much stuff, then you do run that risk of like, not only saturation, but also making what you've already talked about irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly. We certainly ran into that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things of like you have to show something new, but you also have to show that thing that they were interested last time is still there. And I think that's always one of these tough balances to have with trailers. But on the other hand, it's like when I think about when I buy games, I feel like the trailers possibly the most important bit of marketing that they ever do. I don't know if that's just me, but yeah, I definitely think of the trailer. If it sort of paints this particular vision of what the game is and it sells it to me in a very like simple way that connects with me, then it's like when it comes out I'll just be like, okay, I remember like this was sort of the theory of what this game was, and it seems to actually be delivering on that, and I'm more than happy to pick it up.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, only because I literally had to call Mike and ask how does this work, because I've never done it before, is press releases. So I guess, how do you determine if something is press release worthy or not?
If I can imagine it on a website, that's the rule with me. If I can imagine, like, opening Polygon or Kotaku or IGN, and like that's there as a news story, and not going really, really, then that gets a press release. But I don't really do formal press releases. I send like I have my press list, and I'll send out like, hey guys, so there's this thing and I've just tweeted it and it's pretty cool and you should check it out. Usually that's like the level, obviously, and then providing the key thing to realize with sending out stuff to game journalists is they are really busy and they are really stressed and they never have any time. So all you have to do is hand them on a silver platter, here is a thing that is pretty and that will look nice on your front page. Here's the image in a good resolution without any kind of thumbnail or logo or anything, watermark that's gonna be a problem for you. Here is this easy piece of content that you can upload to the site, and then your boss doesn't complain at you for an hour. And like you provide that, and you obviously don't say that, but you provide that. You provide everything they need to put something interesting on their website. But you assume that most won't put it up. That's the other part of it, is you send it. I'll send, if I've got something that I think is particularly newsworthy, I'll send it to like 100 people, and you'll see it on maybe 10 websites, because people are busy, or someone opens it and goes, no, that's not interesting. And it's you kind of throw it out to everyone and see what sticks, and then you'll find that people who then don't write about it, when they see the other websites writing about it, will be like, oh, that's actually like something that people, okay, fine. And you see them kind of one up each other a little bit.
Yeah.
But it has to be interesting. It has to be something that's newsworthy, and that's to do with what you send them. So is it a cool trailer? Is it a cool imagery, screenshots? Is it a weird, interesting thing? Like the things, it has to be a new story, a new news story. So like we're launching a Kickstarter. They get like 20, 30 of those a day, I imagine. But like, we're launching a Kickstarter, but we're doing it in this weird way. Or here's a cool new trailer, by the way we're doing a Kickstarter. Find an angle that actually gives them something other than just a URL that they can point people at. Because unless you're like a famous dev of the past, that's not a news story. Indie puts game on Kickstarter is not a news story. It's not interesting. It's not fresh or different. Something's going wrong with my. With 1 second, something's going wrong with my internet connection. I think. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay,
that's fine. Yeah, you froze for a second. Yeah, I think you're saying like Kickstarter stories are like they get 1 million of them. One of them that I thought had such a simple way to pitch it, and it was like, this is a Kickstarter for a development team in Africa. And it's just like, well, they don't get that every day.
Yeah.
Like, it's something interesting about like the dev community and how it's growing and how it's globalizing and all that. It's like, you need to think about the themes that are happening in the industry, in the world, and think about like, how do you make this relevant to those things?
Yeah.
And it's like, we're doing what everyone else is doing is not necessarily an interesting story.
It's hard. I mean, obviously a lot, if you're someone who's got a reputation, then that's easier, because you might be newsworthy in and of yourself because people are interested. They know that articles are read about you or whatever. But you've got to get to that point, and like, I'm not at that point. I'm not, Notch tweets about walking to the kitchen and it's going to be a news story somewhere. Right? That's not something that's available to most people.
Yeah,
I think it's worth pointing out as well that, like, to the point of, it's got to be interesting, it's got to be newsworthy. Releasing a game isn't anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just, I think that's a shock for everyone.
Yeah.
But it bears repeating. Basically, it's just.
Well, in terms of that, you want to be ahead of that. So you want to, like, 3 weeks before, you want to be getting the reviewers, their codes and everything. But even then, like, I've heard horror stories about a lack of interest in reviewing kind of upcoming games nowadays, just because there's so many of them. So yeah.
Cool. Next on my list is Expos.
Okay.
Have you guys found them?
Oh, I flip-flop on this one a lot. Because they are fun. They're very tiring and like stressful, but they're good for the soul. It's nice to see someone playing your game, and also like there's lots of really useful. I know I get lots of playtest data and lots of kind of. It's good just to see how people are getting on with the game, and you can work out very quickly if your game needs work. I remember the first event we took, Volume 2, was very eye-opening. We were like, oh, okay, we've got work to do. Like, there's stuff to be done here. But so it's useful from all those perspectives, but it is expensive. That's the big thing. It is really expensive. Like, most of the shows have some form of access for indies, which is cheaper or even free. That's great. That's cool. But like, that doesn't last forever. And if you're seen as a successful indie dev, then those doors slam shut for you, which is kind of fair enough. But there are costs associated, or even just travel and hotels, and if you have to bring your own computer and your own monitors and all this kind of stuff, and getting your friends to help you, that's still a cost. That's still their time. So it's a lot of effort. And when you think of it, I think if you're thinking of it just from a marketing point of view, I would argue perhaps not the best way to spend that energy. But I think that there's enough side benefits in terms of talking to the audience and getting the game out there and seeing how it plays in that environment that it justifies it. I think it's just about worthwhile.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think you got to know what you're trying to get out of it, and like you said, there's a lot you can do with play data and all this kind of thing. But again, it is expensive, but if it's part of a sustained strategy to be at everything, keep being newsworthy, keep trying to do interesting things, and keep trying to find and talk to people who genuinely really love your games, whatever it is about you. But I think it's a really good way of cementing a lot of that. And but it is like Mike. I've had times and I'm not even sure that was worth getting out of bed for or whatever. But like I think we've mentioned before, so often things happen and you can't predict the effect they'll have when they at the time that they happen, and then in a year you're like, oh my god, thank God I went to that. And so it's a lot easier to sort of just say, right, do you know what, I'm just going to go to all of these ones this year and just like commit to it and just take like the ups with the downs. And
yeah, it's interesting. I sort of, I've only been at expos pitching other people's games. I pitched Hardlines for Andrew, and I pitched Pig Eat Ball for Nathan at Radius Festival. And I think I'm probably in the same camp where I don't think it's a great marketing play. I think it's really valuable for other reasons, as you said, playtesting. But I think the one that was really beneficial for me was that I'm not the most social person, and learning how to pitch games, and specifically how to learning how to pitch a specific game, because it's like you just have the queue of people coming up to you, and you try this, and if it doesn't work, then you try something else, and you just keep trying stuff throughout the day, and then eventually you sort of narrow in on, okay, this is what this is what sells to people that understand, that, and helps them understand it, and then I think that informs your pitch to press and that kind of stuff like that. So I think it's definitely worth going to like cheap/free expos and getting the player feedback and the pitching practice. But yeah, I think as a pure marketing,
kind of I'd include like some dev meetups in that as well. That like some are very much about like sitting and like having talks and stuff, but some of them are about like showing your game around, and that, like, yeah, absolutely. In terms of helping you hone your pitch, it is really, really interesting. I think perhaps more useful there than it would be in like a really big event like EGX. So one of the things that we noticed with Tango is that like it just hasn't struck a chord like at all, and then at shows it does, and you're like, why is that? Like, there's obviously some difference, and we've sort of narrowed it down to a few things, and we're trying an experiment in the future. Hopefully, the thing that drives it isn't me. Like the fact of having an interested, passionate person talk about the game that they've made is a huge sell, right? Like that's it's a massive bonus, and most people will respond well to that. And I'm really hoping that isn't the difference between Tango.
It's not massively scalable.
Yeah, unless you can clone yourself and ship yourself with it. But it's true, and people are nice. That's the other thing, is people are nice in person. There's a lot of social requirements. Also, I've found really interesting how like there are certainly genres that are better to demo than others. And like the two worst ones are puzzle platformers and stealth games, in my experience, because they require a bit more time or a bit less stress, and these are very loud, noisy environments often at these events. So kind of if your game is the right fit. Also, I mean, multiplayer works amazing at these events because people come in groups, and that's something obviously you guys with Tango have massively benefited from. So there's certainly like, and which events are targeted at which kind of audiences. Radius, for example, is much more of a kind of artsy indie event, whereas you go to Eurogamer or PAX, and they are much more fanboy hardcore audience stuff. And you got to pick the event that's right for you and right for your game.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's sort of interesting is like I do worry about when I'm a dev pitching to other devs, because I feel like devs in general have a slightly different interest than your average consumer.
Correct.
But I think there are games that are made for devs, and they do well, and all the devs buy them, and that's sort of their market. So yeah, it's hard to say on that front. I think the last topic I really want to dig into for this episode is word of mouth. And it's one of the, I feel like it's like discussing these like private investors. It's this nebulous concept that it's so hard to pin down, but I guess unlike the private investors, it's unbelievably critical. But I couldn't put my finger on it. I think the example from this year is, for me at least, is definitely Undertale.
Yeah, massively so.
There's nobody that's played Undertale that doesn't say I've played Undertale, it's amazing. And I think the moral of that story is if you make a game that's that good.
Yeah. Make a great game is amazing advice to give people. But it happens for all games, I think. I think Undertale's an extreme example because it is one of those 95 Metacritic games. Like, it is a standout. I mean, I've not played it yet, but like you say, everyone loves that game. Like, clearly it's doing something very, very right. But it happens for other games as well. Like we've certainly, like Volume, we've seen this slow kind of interest level jumping up. And Thomas Was Alone definitely, like Thomas Was Alone is a game that sold better the longer it was out. And like Thomas Was Alone's like a point now which is doing very well because it just hit a saturation point. And I think a lot of that gets ignored because I think we've become really obsessed with that kind of mega launch kind of rhetoric because that's an exciting story, right? Like something came out and it's massive. But most of the indie games that folks have heard of, most of them were slow burns. They were build-up games. And I think because we don't have that enormous launch and because we don't have any time pressure in terms of boxed releases, like it actually there is room to kind of slowly build that audience up and to, you know, it becomes at that point, it becomes more about kind of a critical mass where you're getting, you know, tens of thousands of people in the door, and you're going, okay, these people, X percent are going to think this is good, and they're going to tell their friends. And there is this, I don't know, someone's going to quantify at some point, but there is this magic point, I believe, where a game has had enough people who like it that it starts to like super sustain long term. Yeah. And you know, there's lots of methods to that. Sales are obviously a very obvious one. Humble Bundle worked really well for Thomas. Humble Bundle, basically the combination of a 75% off sale and a Humble Bundle is what gave Thomas Was Alone that long tail, because it became a game that everyone had heard of, or everyone had a mate who played, you know. And it's not capped out because it's still massively irrelevant on a mega level, like, because, you know, there's always new people finding about indie games, and, you know, Thomas Was Alone, I guess, is on those lists of, like, you know, 20 games to try out, you know. So it happens, and I think it's you know, when with something like Undertale where it's that good that it happens immediately, that's very, very fucking cool. That's my second bleep. Sorry. But, you know, with I think a lot of indie games this happens. Rami put out with Nuclear Throne that kind of slow build it's had, and I that's something that rings true. I think that's something that a lot of devs experience over time.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't think it's changed. Like there's a prevailing wisdom at the moment that kind of that in the indie space that this doesn't happen anymore, and like genuinely you can take Thomas Was Alone and Volume and you can overlap them, and Volume's basically just two Thomas Was Alones. Like it's every spike, every move that Thomas made is just being perfectly reflected in Volume. I think it's the same thing. Now obviously there's a lot of elements feeding into that, like, that make me very lucky, but like I think that's still there. I think those kind of those burner games that kind of happen over time, they're still happening. They're just not as like sexy, I think, like not as immediately happening. You know?
Yeah, I think word of mouth can't happen without everything else that we've talked about, unless you have an exceptionally high quality game, right? And you've got to assume you don't, like, because otherwise
chances are you're not a genius. There's like 3 or 4 games of the level we're talking about released a year tops. Like I think Undertale and Her Story are probably the only 2 I can think of off the top of my head that are like that good, you know.
Yeah, to just literally come out of nowhere. And I think word of mouth, you know, it's I mean, it is almost impossible to quantify. I think you can get a good idea of roughly where people are coming from with, you know, Google Analytics and things like that, like where they're hearing, like in percentage, whether Kotaku was more important than IGN or whatever. But like the amount that you can reapply that and then you know repeat it is like pretty low, like bordering on 0%. You know, because just so much changes between. You know, if you released the game every 6 months, you wouldn't be able to reapply the lessons you learned last time. You know, the things that made it absolutely sore wouldn't be the same. Not to say they would be entirely different, but like it just you can't build a strategy around that stuff, I don't think. So that's why you go and do everything you can. That's why you know, go to all the shows, even if you're not sure if it's worth it. It's why you email every single person on your press list and try and do it interestingly and individually, even though it takes like 3 days solid. You know, like all this kind of stuff, and it just sort of does that. But then you can, I think, you mentioned like evangelists earlier, and like I think after you've had a couple of goes around of this, and it doesn't matter if they're successful or not, you'll end up knowing about people in the press who, or maybe not even in the press, you know, YouTube, whatever, people who have an audience who they don't even have to like your game. They just have to get nod a lot when you're talking and get passionate when you're talking with them. And it's like you can kind of tell that it's not just professional. It's like there is something that you're doing or saying that's kind of, ticking their boxes or whatever. And then you kind of, you concentrate on them a little bit, that's and hope that they like something enough and say the right thing one day and someone else sees it, and you just never know how these things are going to fall out. But
yeah, and they're not going to say they don't like they like it if they don't like it. They're ultimately they're beholden to their audience. So if they don't like something you make, no amount of friendship is going to make that. And you can't be horrible when that happens. Because say again, sorry.
Vetoes, like they don't make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things I was thinking about with word of mouth is the games that I talk about most are the games that sort of, they promise something and it already sounds really interesting, and then they deliver above that. And I think that's sort of the key. Like even if you make a game that's really, really good, if you promised me that up front, I feel like a lot of the time it's like I'm not as excited to talk about that. I kind of feel like there is this sort of underdog. I mean, Undertale was one of these things of like, it was this game that came out of nowhere, and you kind of want to be the person that's like, oh, there's a really good game, and I discovered it, and I'm recommending it to you, and that kind of thing. And I feel like there is a slight advantage on that side of things, where it's like if you're sort of coming from nowhere, it's one of the only advantages of not being established.
Yeah. It's balanced by a lot of disadvantages.
Exactly.
But it's true, yeah. The underdog tale, the kind of the breakout hit. Yeah, no, absolutely, massively helpful.
Cool. I guess we'll open it up to questions, but we've already got 2 lined up. So the first one, there's no way I can. Narfdoptel?
Good.
There's no way I can pronounce that. Anyway, he's releasing an iPad game called Glitchy Checkers, and he wants to know if we think it's, from a marketing perspective, if it's a better idea to release it on the 15th to 17th or just before Christmas on the 22nd. And he was saying, on one hand, people are busy with family stuff, but on the other hand, everyone's got a bunch of people get a bunch of iDevices for Christmas, and you want your game out there when they open it.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because I assume there's a lot of games coming out in that time because it is like a fantastic day to sell games. Like, there's a reason that it's because people, like you say, are switching on their shiny new piece of technology and want stuff to play on it. What I would say, though, is I think if you're someone who's coming out with your first game, then you're going to be swamped regardless. Like, I imagine Apple has already set up, like, these are the games that we're going to be talking about. These are the games from this year, maybe, that have done really well, and they want to kind of elevate those. I think it's a very tricky job to come out of nowhere and hit at Christmas. It has happened. Like, I think Doodle Jump was that story. I think Doodle Jump was one that came out, like, just before Christmas, but that was a long time ago and a very different kind of industry.
Ago, yeah.
So I would say if you've got to do it around Christmas, then I would say maybe like as early as possible, simply so you can have a chance to have good numbers and build up a reputation and maybe get some coverage or some chatter, because the people who, a lot of the people who are going to be talking about your game, will have families. They won't be buying an iOS product. They're going to be, working, and they're going to leave the office on the 20th and not come back, So maybe we'll come back after Christmas. No one's going to die over Christmas. That's a horrible thing to imply. But I would say I would go early. Or actually, like, I would ask, like, can you do it in January? Like, I'm not sure Christmas is, unless your game is phenomenal and super polished. That's the other thing is, remember the people who are going to be buying or who are going to be gifted a piece of technology, probably not like super technologically savvy. So the kind of experience that they're going to look for is going to be something very clean, very polished, very simple, something they can understand. So if your game's in any way, if you look at your game and you genuinely don't think it's as pretty as a King game or as clean as Threes, then you're going to struggle, I think, in that marketplace. So maybe it makes sense to come out at a more quiet time after everyone else has done their thing. Yeah. I don't know. It's a tricky one. I'm not an expert on that marketplace, though, so I might be wrong.
No, I think I would chime in very similarly. Basically, if the obviously you're doing some press efforts right now, and if your feeling is that you're going to get a lot of good coverage around Christmas, then basically go at Christmas. If you're not, try and find a less busy time, and obviously the 15th to 17th will be less busy than the 22nd. But January is going to be much less busy than that.
Yeah, there's probably two like stone cold facts about releasing at that time. One is you will get bought out of the top 100, like just 100%. Like there's just no way that unless you have a million quid you're going to spend on buying installs, you are not going to hit the charts that way. No matter how good your game is. But there are featured slots that are curated. So, like Mike was saying, if it's super polished and you genuinely have people like going, "Oh my god, this is amazing! This is going to be the next threes,"
yeah,
then okay, go for it. You've got to roll the dice sometime. And
but at that point, you have to do.
Sorry,
I interrupted you. At that point, though, it's not. I'm always doing that. I'm sorry. At that point, it's not though. You can't just put it up and hope that they'll find it. Like you need to find someone from Apple.
Yeah,
you need to go to your friends who've released games, who've had a contact at Apple, and get that email address and find that person, have that conversation. Because frankly, everyone else is. If I was releasing a game at Christmas, I would be sat in Apple headquarters right now, demoing it to the guys there, talking to them because of that existing relationship. I would be pushing as hard as I could for them to acknowledge it. And you need to beat me. And I'm not even doing what Smithy's talking about of kind of, literally being able to buy slots by getting activations and various nefarious means. Like, it's a very tough time, and there's lots of money there. And one thing that indies do very well is if all of the people with the money are over there fighting, then just sneak over here where there's no one fighting, and you can do a bit better. And that might be what January is in this situation, unless your game's awesome. And you can find someone at Apple and send them a test flight build and see what they think.
Although you're running a bit late. Like I think all the Christmas slots are probably booked already.
Almost definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Andrew, you said you had a question from Twitter.
Yes, we've got Phil from Bigger. He's at Bigger Play. He's a long-time listener, first-time emailer, I guess. He just thought it's not specifically to do with marketing. Obviously, it came earlier today. Do you all work on more than one thing at once, or do you just focus on one project at once?
So in general, I have one thing in dev and one thing that I'm tinkering with. And the thing that I'm tinkering with, I mean tinkering in a really, really ghetto, barely spending any time on it, but every now, I definitely have my notepad doc of okay, here's this idea and here's this idea, and let's cross these things out from these last couple weeks. So yeah, usually I have one thing that I'm in proper dev on, and then one thing that I just sort of toy with just in case it. I feel like if I have 3 or 4 of those, by the time I finish this one, I'll have something that I'm oh, maybe I'll do that one.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to know what ghetto tinkering is. I think that's probably the first time anyone's ever used that.
I guess lo-fi is what I mean. I don't really put any code to it or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, right now I'm working on various things. Well, we have Coda in production, Volume Coda, which is the VR version, and we have the Vita version we're still working through. So there's those things, but then, working on what the next thing's going to be, a couple of prototypes, a couple of pitches, various different things. Until one of those becomes the locked in, this is what we're doing, that's going to be, there's going to be various different things, because I don't want to just jump on the first idea I have, because it probably isn't the best one. You got to tweak and play with various things. So, but to be honest, this started while Volume was still being finished. So, I'm one of the things we're currently kind of building towards is something that you just described, your ghetto tinkering. I was down in the ghetto tinkering while Volume was being produced, and yeah, it's just this thing that I was playing with as an idea, and now that's something that we're going to see if we can make that work and see if we can make that fly. But then there's other things which are much bigger and kind of but once the next project starts, then I imagine I'll become very focused on that, because I was for Volume's duration. I was just, this is what you're doing, because it's really hard to make a video game. You need to pay a lot of attention.
It's very true. I being a designer, I've always got stuff going. But like while Tango was in production, it was full on. Just that was it for me. A lot of that was derived from the fact that early access is so sort of all-consuming. You know, if you're going to try and do that properly, there's always something to be talking about or posting or whatever. And we had like a almost weekly update schedule at one point, so that was quite exciting. Now though, I think, and moving forward, like I think the ideal is like one thing at a time, but that almost never happens. So at the minute we've got client work on, we've got that's like literally half of our time every month. We recently had like a meeting about like, right, what are we going to do with Tango now that it's out? What are we going to do next? And one of those things was we've got a week to apply for a prototype fund if we want to, and we decided that we did want to. And so all of a sudden, like one of the weeks that we were spending on not client work for me was writing a whole game design and pitching it and all this kind of stuff and trying to gather a crack team around it, and that was quite exciting and fun. But yeah, I guess like ultimately I'm always striving towards just the one thing at a time, and that's even on like a development point of view. I'd much rather just like I don't think we're ever going to make games that like invent new genres at Spilt Milk. So I like to think that you'd be able to sort of take things kind of one feature at a time and just get it done, and then move on, and then get the next one done, and it just that's something worth striving for. It will never happen, but you got to fight for it, right?
Cool. We had another question from Glitch Games earlier, and it's really kind of related to what you just said. But what are our thoughts on open development?
Cool. Commit to it if you're going to do it. It's just not worth doing half-heartedly. And I honestly think that with Tango we didn't do enough. Like we just didn't at all. And it's something that you have to get the whole team to buy into. So you've got to find. And it sort of applies differently for each person, right? So with an audio guy, you can probably stream like a couple of hours of them like tinkering with something that's like a half-developed tune, and that would be interesting. But they'd probably have to talk about it. An artist, you can probably just stream their screen the whole time, and
they would like, never let you do that. I don't know. I don't know any artists. Yeah.
I'm determined to find some that will. Design's more of a, I guess, like. You'd probably just play the build and talk through it, and then
just
like
Twitter, right? Just screen grab Twitter.
Just screen. And then code is difficult, unless you're sort of. I think code and design are probably the ones where it's like, well, every now and like once a week or whatever, you'd sort of sit with a new feature and that sort of thing. But it's brilliant, but it's tough. It adds a lot of overheads, and you've got to do it properly.
Yeah,
I mean, especially from a marketing perspective, I think it's hard enough to have like enough going on that you have your big pushes, enough content for your big pushes. And I just can't imagine for most games that you just have enough to spread over, such a high frequency and such a long period of time. It just seems very, very difficult. And obviously there's games that it's well suited for and it's great for them, but I think it's very few games and very few games/people combinations that it works for.
Well, that's the thing is, for me, like don't get me wrong, I wouldn't. Anyone who wants to do it, fair play. It's a cool thing. There's clearly an audience for it, but like making video games requires really, really smart people to concentrate very hard, and fail a lot, and do all this to add this performative element to it, where like they've got people watching over their shoulders all the time, and commenting and that looks rubbish. That's like, I wouldn't want anyone in my team to have that kind of. I wouldn't invite people off the street to come in and stand behind my team, tapping them on the shoulder, asking them questions, and having an opinion. Like, with all the respect to the audience that is humanly possible, I don't need that. That's they're skilled people doing a very tough job, and I think unless you have, it's like Smithy said, unless you have, I think if you're a super small team and you're both show-offs and you fancy it, then I think that makes sense. But like, I would never ask anyone who worked for me to go through that level of stress. It's hard enough having me looking over their shoulder. Like they don't need everyone else looking over their shoulder.
Cool. We've got a super quick question. Mike, can you confirm that you use Squarespace for your website?
I do. Okay. Biffle Games. Specifically for the volume site. Because it's really, really easy, and I don't care if people laugh at me because it works, and I think it took Alexander like 2 days to do it, and then I just went in and made it a bit prettier, and that was it.
Yeah, and they're also a big podcast sponsor. If you ever listen to podcasts, they sponsor like 1 million podcasts.
It's
Yeah,
true.
So,
it's true.
so we love Squarespace.
I think I did because I watch a lot. We do love Squarespace. They're great. I think I heard it. I think I used like a kind of funny coupon because I like kind of funny games. So yeah, it's a good solution unless you're like, it's that classic thing of, do you build your own engine? Not unless you really like making engines. I think the website's one of those things where it's a solved problem. You can get a website made that looks pretty smart, does the job, does the kind of thing that Smithy's saying. It's basically a big buy button, right? And a blog, and you can get that all done in a very short space of time. So I for me, it makes a lot of sense.
Cool. And the other one is, do you / would you consciously design games to cater to streaming YouTubers / Twitch? What makes a game fun to watch compared to just fun to play?
I wouldn't do it at the expense of the player, but I think there's a lot of areas where you can make things easier. Well, volume. I mean, volume is conscious of that aspect, but to be honest, everything we added to make the game easier to understand for a viewer made it play better because it was easier to understand for a gamer. I like this stuff. I think the Tomb Raider game I've been playing has like a spectator mode where you can have like additional things coming up and stats explaining stuff. If it's relatively easy, I think it's a cool thing to do, and anything you can do to encourage those people to play your game is obviously great for your game. But I would argue that if you're making your game good to watch, you're probably making it better to play.
Yeah, there's tons of overlap. I don't know if we'll ever touch play as a topic, but it's the same thing. Like, people sort of assume that because you're making a bunch of like decisions towards one market, it's actually like it affects the game negatively in other ways, like somehow subtracts. But it's like, no, like, good game design is just good game design. And like you say, yeah, if you're making it, like, if you're foregrounding information, that's good game design. If a player understands what the consequences of their actions are going to be, and what, all that sort of stuff. I mean, as a designer personally, I've got a couple of ideas where not necessarily just streamers, but like, I really, really like the social interactions that you can get in games. I think some of the passive stuff that's done in like Dark Souls and those kinds of games is really interesting. I've got a couple of ideas that I'd love to explore along those lines, but I'm not entirely convinced that on their own it's enough to sell, because ultimately I'm a businessman and, gotta make some Skrilla occasionally.
You two with your Ghetto and your Skrilla, just I don't know what podcast I'm on. This is awesome. You're both trying to be cool. It's because of my Christmas tree. I pointed the wrong way there. My awesome Christmas tree. You're feeling the need to show off.
It's
exactly what it is. The hat was totally an attempt, but it's not worked,
But yeah. So like, I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm always, it's the thing I'm constantly battling is, as a designer, things interest me that aren't necessarily fun. There are things that I want to explore that, like, the whole point might be that they're not fun. Like, that's actually, quite an interesting idea. Like, this is, to make an unpleasant experience. Anyway, whole other podcast.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of the same way. Just like, if you're making a game and you see opportunities to make things clearer or to make things more fun to watch compared to play, like, you go for it. But I think, I wouldn't specifically say, okay, look, the most important thing about this game is that it's fun for streamers, just because I think it's just not how I think right now. And, I don't think I know enough about what a streamer wants or what does or doesn't make a video work right now. Like, I watch a lot of streamers and, watch them play stuff, and sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's not. I don't really understand it enough to really design around it. Cool. I guess that's the first part of our marketing episode. I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek in the second part, I guess. The second part is just all about reach. So it's all about contacting press and YouTubers and all that kind of stuff, and finding evangelists. So yeah, we'll continue talking about that stuff next week. And thank you everyone for joining. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I was listening to Idle Thumbs today, and they say, if you like our podcast, recommend it to someone else, because that's the only way that they get new listeners, and they have loads of listeners. So I thought I'd try that one, but otherwise you can find
word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, that's how it works.
That's it. It's marketing 101.
Hashtag WOM.
But yeah.
Hashtag ghetto tinkering.
Ironically, I'm doing much less of that because I spend a lot of my time editing and preparing these podcasts now. So
Doing
it's
the real
ruining
work.
me.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Nice.
But yeah, someone just asked if the VODs are put anywhere, and yeah, the VODs appear on YouTube, and there's also audio versions on our website, GameFactoryPodcast.com, and on iTunes. So yeah, if you could, happily follow this Twitch account, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, comment, let us know what you're thinking, send questions to us on Twitter. I'm One of Moo. Mike is Mike Bithell,
Yeah.
and Andrew Smith is Spilt Milk Studio without the S. But yeah, I think that's everything. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.
I got to press the button with the other.